Hi, everyone. Welcome to Research America's Alliance discussion. I'm Mary Woolley, the President and CEO of Research America, your moderator today. For the last several weeks, Research America has hosted Alliance discussions featuring our 2025 Advocacy awardees. I'm looking forward to this conversation today. So thank you for joining us and for your partnership in the Research America Alliance. Today's special guests are Dr. Donald Wood, President and CEO, and Mr. Paul Melmeyer, Executive Vice President, Public Policy and Advocacy of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. MDA, the 2025 Paul Rogers Distinguished Organization Advocacy Award winner, has been the largest nonprofit supporter of neuromuscular disease research for 75 years now, investing more than $1 billion in research and gene therapy advances. Today, we'll have a conversation with Dr. Wood and Mr. Melmeyer as they discuss the future of gene therapy for ultra-rare conditions and share insights into MDA's pivotal role in accelerating research and improving care for individuals with neuromuscular disease. Before we get started, I'll quickly remind our audience to please type your questions into the Q&A box or chat, and we'll pose as many as we can during the Q&A portion of today's discussion. So I'm going to turn to our guests now, and starting with you, Dr. Wood, I understand you have a special surprise for us.
Well, thank you, Mary, and welcome everybody to this special webinar. We are very, very pleased to be here. And our early surprise is for 75 years, MDA has been a driving force in neuromuscular disease research, care, and advocacy, fueling breakthroughs that have changed the trajectory of the diseases. As we launch our 75th anniversary campaign, we're not just reflecting on our history. We're pushing forward, we're accelerating research, we're expanding access to care and empowering the next generation of advocates. So to start out, we've brought a video that I hope you find it as exciting to watch as we have found it exciting to prepare. It highlights the progress we've made, the bold vision that helps shape the future of neuromuscular disease research, care, and advocacy. Enjoy.
Once there was a man who couldn't stand.
A mom who couldn't wait.
Doctors who wouldn't stop.
There were hundreds of thousands of us.
Living in black and white.
A scientific community that said it couldn't be done.
Discoveries undiscovered.
Treatments that didn't exist.
Support that wasn't there.
And then you.
And then I.
And then we. Brought neuromuscular disease into screaming
and then streaming color.
For 75 years, our voices have thundered through the halls of Congress.
For 75 years, we've willed the impossible into existence. First with the gene.
Then with treatment.
And next, with muscle regeneration.
For 75 years, we've pushed the science.
Changed the laws.
Raised the funds.
Shifted the narrative.
And transformed the reality of life with these diseases.
We've built communities together. Broken barriers inside and out.
We've helped together.
Hoped together.
Planned together.
Camped together.
Believed together.
Discovered together.
We came together to establish the field of neuromuscular medicine.
And make it thrive.
Call that legacy?
Call it impact.
Call it momentum. Just call it ours.
Because it's the support, generosity, and expertise of generations of heroes that gives MDA the strength we have today.
And until that tomorrow, the neuromuscular disease is a thing of the past.
You couldn't stop us if you tried.
Well, Dr. Wood, that is really inspiring. I haven't seen it before, and it just makes me all the more excited to know that you and MDA, your colleagues, will be receiving an award with Paul Rogers' name on it, a man, when he was in the Congress, who really stood for advocacy and for research and knew what that was all about, that combination. It's how things happen. So congratulations to
Thank
you
you.
and all your
Thank you.
colleagues. I want to make sure to say hi to Paul, to Mr. Melmeyer as well. So glad that you are joining us. So let's dive into some questions we have for you. So Dr. Wood, we know that MDA is the nation's largest nonprofit supporter of neuromuscular research with over $1 billion invested to date. So what are some of the most pivotal advances along the way in muscle biology and therapy development during your 45-year history so far?
75-year history, right?
So far, yep.
So far. I think the best way to describe this is you have to think about what it was like in 1950 when a handful of families who had a disease that people didn't understand went around to raise money, Now remember in 1950, we did not know, well, let me back up. All the muscular dystrophies are genetic disorders. Okay, they all arise from some defect to a human gene, or in some cases, human genes. But in 1950, they didn't know what the genetic material was. There was a group in England that some people may know the names of. They were looking at DNA, and then there was the world's greatest chemist, Linus Pauling, here in the U.S., who thought it was a protein. The other thing that nobody knew about was how muscle worked. Nobody knew how muscle generated force. Yes, we knew that there was a nerve coming into muscle and that somehow they were connected, but we didn't know the chemistry and the details. So think of the hope that those handful of families had to have in 1950, when they created the Muscular Dystrophy Association. There was nobody studying neuromuscular diseases, let alone the muscular dystrophies. MDA truly is a unique charity in the voluntary health space, is that it started its work before there ever was a neuromuscular disease medicine and scientific community. So it's not only that they had to start the research, they had to attract people to come and do the research. There was nobody doing this stuff. And I think one of the greatest achievements in the first 30 years, in fact, I'll say in the first 36 years, MDA created the field of neuromuscular disease research and science. And at the end of that 36 years, they had the greatest single breakthrough discovery in the history of muscular dystrophy, and indeed, when it comes to genetic medicine, in the history of genetic medicine. They found in 1986, with funding entirely from the Muscular Dystrophy Association, the gene underlying Duchenne muscular dystrophy was identified by Lou Kunkel and his team up at Children's Hospital at Harvard at a time when, and Lou and I laugh about this, he's got a letter from NIH that says they wouldn't fund the research because the technology didn't exist to discover a gene, a human gene like that. And he did. That opened up a whole new field of discovery. And then we have more things after that, because we can talk about gene therapy a little bit later. But first, you had to find the genetic cause of the diseases. And that was the start of a whole new field of exciting genetic medicine that, frankly, the neuromuscular disease community has been part of the leaders in.
That's a remarkable story, and the determination, the resolve it took to get there in 36 years, but you did get there, and a great deal has followed. I'm going to turn to you, Paul, to talk to us a little bit about some of the major challenges today that neuromuscular disease patients are experiencing, and the work that MDA is doing to improve their care, as well as the research that you fund.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and thank you to you and Research America for both hosting me and MDA today, but also to be giving us a very generous award in recognition of our advocacy and public policy work. It's a very good question, Mary, on the challenges that still remain for neuromuscular disease patients in accessing safe and effective treatments and care. Really, the first challenge that comes to mind is that there is still a number of, in fact, most neuromuscular conditions that still don't have any safe and effective therapy approved for their condition. Within rare diseases, of course, this is unfortunately common, and within neuromuscular rare diseases, there have been a number of therapies that have been approved for a select handful of the neuromuscular diseases, including Duchenne and SMA and ALS and Pompe disease and a handful of others. But still, the vast majority of neuromuscular diseases do not have any FDA-approved treatment. And certainly, as we're talking about gene therapies, only two have a gene therapy approved: spinal muscular atrophy and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So really, we start with trying to tackle the challenges that still are pervasive in preventing new therapies from reaching the market for our populations. And that includes trying to ensure that initial funding and the de-risking of the process for the initial preclinical work is in place to allow for the initial research that needs to happen into these potential therapeutics to not be harmed. And unfortunately, and I appreciate Research America's leadership in this area, we're seeing potential harms at the National Institutes of Health right now, with funding being jeopardized, with grants being jeopardized, and so forth. And even if that preclinical work is successful in finding therapeutic targets, oftentimes the biotechs that may be wanting to take those targets through the clinical trial process and eventually to market face a number of different headwinds in trying to do so, mostly financial, and just the commercialization of these products oftentimes is just not attractive enough for the biotechs to do so. So many challenges in trying to get therapies and safe and effective treatments to market, and especially with gene therapies. And even once they are in market, there are a number of challenges that exist there as well, including lack of insurance coverage in a variety of different places, as well as logistical impediments to our community receiving these oftentimes very complex therapies in highly specialized and oftentimes few and far in between multidisciplinary care centers that we help fund and that we support across the U.S., but are still not as well resourced and not as extensive as they should be. So, number of challenges that remain in front of our community in accessing care that they truly do deserve, but we are here to try to tackle all of it.
I hear that loud and clear. There certainly are a combination of headwinds right now. But some of those are long-standing, and it really takes determined leadership to push on through. So we're very proud to be partners with you in that sense, and all senses. So, Dr. Wood, there's no question that gene therapies have revolutionized patient care in the last few decades. How has MDA supported and encouraged the research that led to previous advances, and what are you doing today?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that in the history of human medicine, and the history of how the medical profession developed around understanding diseases, etc., genetic diseases were pushed aside because everyone felt that I've got medical textbooks that said there's no way to treat a genetic disease.
Yeah.
And genetic diseases weren't taught in medical school. And the advances in genetic medicine have come so quickly in the last 10 years, starting probably around 2014 or so, with the spinal muscular atrophy first gene therapy approach. Basically, physicians and the care center people trained before that time never got training in how to manage genetic diseases, and it's complex. One of the things you learn right away when you try to start treating genetic disease by going after the gene is you better start out being very humble at what you don't know. The DNA in a cell is well protected. It may have a defect somewhere in its makeup that's causing a horrible disease, but trying to get into that nucleus, trying to get
Yeah,
into the
yeah,
cell where that nucleus is there and then fix it, that's one problem. Second problem is muscle ain't no easy tissue to work in. How many nuclei with DNA does a muscle cell have? It's all, they've got them all over the place. And so the challenge for researchers is huge to try and do that. And but we started with, when I said in 1986, when we first discovered the gene for Duchenne, we started supporting efforts at gene therapies within 5 years. Within
yeah,
5 years,
yeah.
when the bulk of what we thought we knew, we were just truly ignorant, and things did not go well initially. It's not only tough to do gene therapy, but side effects can be very severe, and in some cases even fatal, and that slowed things up initially. But now what we're seeing is a better understanding. We now have dozens, well, not dozens, that's overstating it, but at least about 10 or 12 different
Really?
neuromuscular diseases that people are working for gene therapies. And as they do that, they learn more and more about how better and better to approach gene therapies in people who have, unfortunately, they're almost all progressive diseases. So
Hmm. Hmm.
just I grew up when the gold standard was double-blind placebo-controlled trials, okay, and da how do you do a double-blind placebo-controlled trial in a progressive disease that some of the
Yeah,
people are infants, some of the people are children, some of the people are teenagers, some of the people are adults? It's very complicated, and we have to have new ways of doing clinical trials.
yeah.
And we're in the process now of debating new ways. And what do you
Well, that,
use as what do you
yeah,
use as an I go one more thing. What do you use as an endpoint? As an endpoint,
right. Hmm. Hmm.
medicine is used to seeing people get better.
Right.
Well, guess what? A gene therapy in a genetic disease isn't going to make you better. It's going to stop the disease at that point if it's really working. But, and we'll probably get to this a little later, I hope. Now what? You
Yeah.
stop the disease, but you're not going to get better.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear on the challenges for what we think of as more conventional or legacy clinical trial models and the need for change. And I'd like to ask, actually, Paul, maybe you could jump in here too about other kinds of challenges that confront you. You know, we're hearing about um, design issues and how do you design clinical trials and regulate them. You know, how do you fund um, uh, the translation to commercialize uh, findings. But tell me about other challenges, ethical challenges, perhaps ethical equity concerns. How do you approach those in your work?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. It's a very important question and something that we're constantly thinking of throughout our entire work, ensuring that
Mhm.
health equity is centered at our entire public policy and advocacy and beyond efforts, and that certainly is true within gene therapy as well. You know, the first issue of equity that comes to mind is the inequities on rarity, essentially, and that some diseases are so rare, they're called oftentimes ultra rare diseases,
Yeah,
that they're just essentially
heard that.
unattractive for our for-profit biopharmaceutical system
Mhm.
to develop therapies within. And consequently, just by the given nature of an individual having a particularly rare disease, they're going to be strongly disadvantaged in being able to obtain safe and effective, meaningful treatments for their disease. If the disease is too rare, too complex, too heterogeneous, biopharma may just walk away from developing a therapy in that space. And sadly, we've seen that happen a number of times within neuromuscular diseases, in which there could be a gene therapy that could be incredibly effective for a patient population of 200, 300 individuals, let's say, but just it's an unattractive target for the biopharmaceutical industry, so it just is not going to be developed. And that truly is a very unfortunate inequity that we still see remaining. This gets even worse for N of 1 therapies, for those bespoke gene therapies or bespoke treatments that are for individuals that might be the only person with that disease, or maybe there's
Right.
only a handful of individuals with that disease. And so consequently, it's up to the family to raise $1 million, oftentimes more than that, to be able to fund the development of a
Yeah.
therapy. And obviously, if the only way to have a safe and effective treatment is for a family to have to find $1 million to be able to obtain that treatment, obviously that is as inequitable as it could potentially get. We still need to see further advancements in diversity in clinical trials. We've seen this administration potentially walk away from that within hiding guidances in their websites that initially had to do with clinical trial diversity. Thankfully, in many ways, they are back, but nonetheless, our trials remain not as diverse as they need to be. And then post-approval, there are still a number of affordability and access challenges that remain for those who are socioeconomically and otherwise disadvantaged. We see state Medicaid agencies looking for ways to delay coverage of treatments, and this is only going to get worse if Medicaid is cut at the federal level, which we know Congress is considering right now. And then we've been in conversations in which we've heard from clinicians that they've had to turn away patients who would otherwise be children who would otherwise be eligible for a gene therapy because the travel and logistics of that family, let's say it's a single mother of 5, having to travel 100 miles to the specialized care center 6 times over the course of 3 months in order for that child to safely obtain the gene therapy, that they've essentially just had to say no. The clinic has essentially had to say no. They just couldn't assure that the child would be able to safely do that. So there's a number of inequities remaining within our system that prevents safe and effective treatments reaching our population.
Well, it's such daunting challenges, to be sure. I want to be sure that before we go to questions, Dr. Wood, that you tell us in a few words about your vision. You're not going to be discouraged about all these very real challenges that both you and Paul have laid out. I'm confident that you have a vision and some promising signals on the horizon there that you can tell us a little bit about. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mary. Yes, I do.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it comes from the data that we have that says, why has America been a leader in genetic medicine? For one reason, and it's a leader because of the voluntary health and the generosity of American people in supporting charities like the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And why do I say that? Well, because we can do things that the pharmaceutical companies can't do, and we can do them, but they need. So we can do the animal studies that can lead to identifying potential therapies. We can take a lot of the cost out of the research that's necessary to develop a treatment. That's one thing. Our advocacy, the fact that we are an umbrella organization, this is a place where those folks that there may only be 10 or 20 or 100 people can come to. And we can help them raise funds for their disorder. And can we do anything more? You bet. We can, and we are trying. We've got what we call the Kickstart program, where we actually are funding, I'm not going to go into the details, but we're funding research to develop a gene therapy for an ultra rare disease. And we're going to cover all of the details up to actually treating the patient. Okay. And then we can go to the pharmaceutical companies, but the advocacy part is super, super important. Anyone who knows anybody with a rare, ultra rare neuromuscular disease, tell them to get in touch with us because we'll help them. We'll help them.
I love this. I love this, Dr. Wood, Mr. Melmeyer, that your focus on getting to the finish line here, making sure that advocates are equipped with the arguments and the enthusiasm, the determination to make good things happen for patients who can't wait and who should not be looking at staggering expenses to get to the next step. You've been terrific. I know we've got some questions, so I'm going to ask my colleague Ellie Dehoney to field a couple of those in our time that we have remaining. Ellie, over to you.
Thank you so much. And, you know, this has been such a terrific conversation. There are questions pre-submitted and live. One has to do with timelines. We've got a couple of pre-submitted questions on this. Do you have a sense, or is there any way of kind of thinking about the timelines for gene therapies going forward for MD and for other rare diseases? I don't know, Paul or Ronald, if you...
Paul, you want to talk about that? I mean, the reason I'm giving it to Paul is because when the Duchenne gene was discovered, I was approached by every news organization in the world about how long will it take to develop a therapy. Unfortunately, I was wrong in every answer I gave, so I'm not very good at telling. It takes more time than you think, because remember what I said earlier. Trying to get into a cell, trying to get into the nucleus, and trying to get to the DNA to make the change, the fix, the repair that's necessary is itself the major challenge. And every person has a little bit of different genetics. Every person is a little bit different. And sometimes you have to make adaptations for the individual, not just for the disease. So it's a very complicated process.
That's a really good point.
We're progressing, but genetic diseases are individual diseases. They occur in, we have a common diagnosis for lots of people, but every one of those people have different genetics, and the therapies sometimes get messed up because of the different genetics.
Yeah, I would only add to that really there's kind of good news and bad news in response to this question. The good news is that science really has rapidly been evolving to find the genes of underlying genetic reasons for these genetic conditions, and consequently finding ways in which gene therapies could be developed for a lot of different rare genetic diseases. The bad news is, while science has been advancing, unfortunately, we've seen the financial and commercialization prospects of these gene therapies going in the other direction. We've seen gene therapy companies folding or dropping potential products more frequently than not over the course of the last couple of years. So we have a lot we need to figure out on the financial commercialization side to actually take these scientific findings and advances and make them into something that our for-profit biopharmaceutical industry can actually bring to market and then be able to sell. The good news is that there's a lot of great minds on this very issue. You know, we hear Dr. Marks, CBER director at the FDA, talk a lot about this, a number of different innovative ways the FDA is trying to tackle this. So there's a whole lot of really amazing people trying to tackle these very issues. But hopefully, with the scientific advancements we've found over these last 10 to 20 years and a whole number of different rare genetic diseases, that can be translated into actual patient benefits here very shortly.
I can say I never want to go to Capitol Hill without you and Donald again. You're both just the most terrific advocates and just explain things in ways that make so much sense in terms of the ecosystem. There was a question in the Q&A that I'd love to get to if we have time. Well, I'd love to get to all of them, but there was one that I think probably a lot of folks are thinking about, and that is gene therapy in terms of symptoms. The question itself is gene therapy, if gene therapy targets hepatic tissues, how is it expected to improve symptoms in other body systems? I bet others have this question, but I know it's one that takes the expertise that you all have. So
genetic diseases are complicated because you don't know always where the gene is being expressed, i.e. where it's going to have an impact or effect. So yes, we call it muscular dystrophy and we look at skeletal muscle, etc. But dystrophin is found in the brain. Okay, so now you're going to have what's it doing in the brain?
Why is it there?
I don't know. You know, it's found in other tissues. It's found in cardiac tissue. We have cardiac problems. It's found in a whole bunch of other sort of tissues. So this is true of lots and lots of genetic disorders. Other problem is a gene defect genetic diseases generally aren't caused by just one defect to the gene. We know over 1,000 different defects to the Duchenne gene. Cystic fibrosis gene, same thing. Over 1,000 different disorder defects, okay? And and sometimes those defects are expressed in other tissues. So for example, part of the cystic fibrosis gene system can cause infertility in some patients,
Wow.
but not in other patients.
Not in
So
others.
very complex. Great question. Great question. It just emphasizes why I said earlier, if you're going to go after and try to cure genetic diseases, you better start out by being humble and work your way through it.
Good
And
advice for
determined.
all of us. I
Yes.
think, Mary, over to you. I think we've hit our time, which is so sad.
Yeah, wow, I feel like we were just getting started in many ways, and I encourage everybody to come next week and join us, and maybe have a chance to meet Dr. Wood, to meet Paul, and have more of your questions answered, if you will. We do thank you for joining us today, and again, congratulations on the upcoming award. I do have one quick announcement before we end, which is to please join us. As I already said, I have the quick announcement. I'm going to say it again. Join us next week, Wednesday, March 12th, for one of our biggest events of the year, the 2025 Advocacy Awards Program, in person at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington. We will be honoring individuals and organizations like MDA who are driving innovation, advocating for progress, and making waves in the world of medical, health, and scientific research and innovation. It promises, as it always is, to be an inspiring afternoon and evening. So take a moment to review the full list of advocacy stars we are honoring and registered now. Thanks to some generous sponsors, there's no cost to attend, but we do ask you to register. So thank you all again for joining today's Alliance discussion. Thank you, Ellie, and all the team for your help, and especially thank you, Dr. Wood, Mr. Melmeyer, for all the work you're doing every day on behalf of patients who look to you for their future health and well-being. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day.